There's a reason why your life feels scattered, why your inner world seems like a battlefield. You try to grow, to find purpose, to understand yourself, but something always pulls you back. The truth is, you're not one person, you are many. Within you live different forces, ancient energies that have shaped human consciousness for centuries. But without understanding these inner archetypes, you'll always be at war with yourself. In this video, Authority, we're going to uncover the 7 archetypes of the soul and show you how to reclaim control over your life from the inside out. Stay with me until the end, because understanding these archetypes isn't just self-help, it's soul transformation. We're not solving a surface problem. We're solving the core of why you feel lost, disconnected, and unsure of who you really are. The shadow is the part of yourself you were taught to despise before you even knew what it meant to be human. It is composed of everything you've been told not to be: your rage, your jealousy, your lust, your selfishness, your insecurity. Not because these parts of you are inherently evil, but because the world you were raised in made them unacceptable. From childhood, you were trained to smile, to be polite, to perform a version of yourself that pleased others. And whatever didn't fit into that performance was cast aside, buried in the unconscious, where it festered and grew teeth. The shadow is not a villain, it is an exile. It is the neglected truth about who are, and the more you pretend it doesn't exist, the more power it gains. Most people live in fear of their shadow, and for good reason. It doesn't speak in gentle language. It doesn't wait its turn. It erupts in moments of weakness. When you lash out, when you sabotage relationships, when you recoil from success, when you envy others, when you lie for no reason. Authority. The shadow expresses itself through all the behaviors you regret afterward, but can't seem to stop repeating. It's not because you're broken. It's because you're split. One part of you is trying to stay in control, while the other, the shadow, is trying to be heard. And the more you repress it, the more dramatic its attempts to break through become. The tragedy is that most people spend their lives pretending the shadow isn't real. They project it onto others. They accuse, criticize, and moralize, not realizing they are simply trying to kill the part of themselves they hate the most. What you despise in others is often what you refuse to see in yourself. When you call someone arrogant, manipulative, cruel, or weak, it's worth asking yourself if these are qualities you've buried in your own psyche. The world becomes a mirror, and until you face what's hiding in your reflection, you will keep fighting shadows outside instead of confronting the one within. To integrate the shadow is not to become immoral. It is to become whole. You were not born to be half a person. You were not meant to walk through life with only the traits that make others comfortable. You need your darkness. Your anger, when integrated, becomes your boundary. Your envy becomes clarity about what you desire. Your fear becomes caution that protects your future. These parts of you aren't your enemies. They are your power, twisted by rejection. When you bring them back into the light of consciousness, you don't become dangerous. You become dangerous to the illusions that once ruled you. But facing the shadow takes courage most people don't have. It means revisiting old pain, questioning your morality, shattering your self-image, and standing in front of your own inner chaos without running. It means letting go of the need to be seen as good in order to become real. You must be willing to look at the worst in you without shame and say, "This, too, is me." Only then can you begin to choose how to express it. Consciously, creatively, with wisdom. The shadow doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It disappears when you stop lying to yourself about what you're capable of. The most authentic people are not ones who claim to be pure. They are the ones who have met their own monsters and made peace with them. The shadow is your teacher. It teaches through discomfort. It shows you the gap between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. It humbles your ego, dismantles your pride, and breaks the mask you've worn for safety. And when that mask finally cracks, the real transformation begins. Not the kind that makes you palatable to others, but the kind that makes you powerful in yourself. You stop chasing perfection and begin the difficult, sacred work of integration. You stop trying to fix yourself and start remembering that nothing was ever broken, only hidden, only silenced, only misunderstood. The persona is the mask you wear to survive. It is not your identity, but your adaptation, shaped from the moment you first realized you were being watched, judged, measured. You learned early that certain behaviors won love, approval, and protection, so you performed them. You smiled when you were sad. You were polite when you were angry. You agreed when you disagreed. And over time, the performance became so convincing, even you forgot it was a role. The persona is not a lie, it is a compromise. It is the version of you that could exist without punishment, that fit into the expectations of family, school, society. But the price of that fit was the silence of your deeper self. This mask is necessary in many ways. Civilization cannot function without it. It smooths human interaction, sets boundaries for behavior, and provides a sense of order. But what begins as protection can quickly become a prison. When you believe the mask is who you are, when you confuse the act with the actor, you become detached from inner world. You start to fear anything that doesn't match your carefully curated image. You reject vulnerability, spontaneity, depth. You become addicted to control because exposure now feels like death. The more people admire your persona, the more terrifying it becomes to take it off. There's a moment in every life when the persona begins to crack. Often it comes through crisis. Relationship collapses, a career fails, and illness strips away identity. In these moments, the truth begins to leak through. You realize that everything you thought made you valuable was conditional, that people love the version of you that served their comfort, not the one you really are. And in this shattering, a question arises: who am I without the mask? This is the beginning of real self-awareness, and for many it is terrifying. Because the mask has been worn so long, what lies beneath it feels unfamiliar, raw, maybe even dangerous. But without confronting the persona, you will never know what your soul actually desires. You will chase success that doesn't satisfy you, relationships that drain you, roles that make you feel empty. You will climb ladders leaned against the wrong walls. The persona may win applause, but it cannot give you meaning. And eventually, the emptiness will catch up with you, not as depression or anxiety alone, but as a deep spiritual fatigue, a sense that you've betrayed yourself and don't know how to return home. The tragedy is that modern culture encourages the persona, even worships it. Social media is built on it. Corporate life demands it. Public life rewards it. The world becomes a stage where masks speak to other masks, and no one sees the person behind the performance. But the soul cannot live like this. It starts to rebel. It sends signals through sleepless nights, inexplicable sadness, the nagging feeling that you are meant for something more. These are not problems to fix. They are messages from your deeper self, urging you to reclaim your truth. Removing the persona is not about abandoning social roles or rejecting the need for boundaries. It is about remembering that you are more than what others see. It is about acting from the inside out, not the outside in. When you start to live in alignment with your inner values rather than external approval, the mask begins to loosen your authority. You become less afraid of judgment because you're no longer outsourcing your worth. You don't need to be seen as perfect. You need to be seen as real. And in that honesty, others begin to drop their masks too. This is how transformation spreads, not through preaching but through authenticity. There is immense courage in choosing truth over image, integrity over likability. You may lose people. You may confuse those who only knew your persona, but you will gain yourself. And that self, the one who does not have to pretend, is the only one capable of deep connection, of purpose, of true power. The persona is not your enemy. It is not your identity either. It was built to protect you, but now it is time to outgrow it. Because the life you want, the peace you seek, the depth you crave, none of it can be reached while you are still performing. The anima and animus are the soul's mirror, reflections of the inner feminine within the man and the inner masculine within the woman. These archetypes do not represent gender roles, but psychic energies that exist within every individual, regardless of sex. They are the parts of your psyche you have likely disowned because the world taught you to over-identify with one polarity and reject the other. The man is told to be strong, rational, and unyielding. The woman is taught to be nurturing, soft, and emotional. But beneath this social conditioning lies the truth: every man contains an inner feminine, intuitive and emotional, just as every woman contains an inner masculine, focused and assertive. Without recognizing this duality, the self remains incomplete. The anima, the feminine within, often appears in the dreams and fantasies of men. She is not simply a symbol of romance, but of the unconscious itself. Mysterious, creative, emotional, and deeply connected to intuition. When a man represses his anima, he becomes rigid, emotionally distant, disconnected from his deeper feelings. He may fear vulnerability, reject the language of emotion, or become addicted to control. He may seek out relationships that feel emotionally safe yet unfulfilling, never realizing he is not truly seeking a woman. He is seeking the part of himself he left behind. He projects the anima onto others, idealizing or resenting them, instead of integrating her within. Similarly, the animus represents the inner masculine in the female psyche. When a woman is cut off from this inner force, she may feel lost, passive, dependent on others to define her path. She may struggle to assert herself, to make decisions, to hold boundaries. The animus, when undeveloped, often shows up as a critical voice in the mind, telling her she is not enough, that should be more like this or less like that. This voice doesn't empower, it controls. But when she begins to integrate the animus, she discovers her inner discipline, her courage, her sovereignty. She learns that power does not have to be masculine in the traditional sense. It can be balanced, wise, and rooted in purpose. These inner archetypes are not fixed roles. They are energies in dynamic relationship, and often they are in conflict. You may feel torn between softness and strength, between logic and intuition, between feeling deeply and acting decisively, but this conflict is not a problem. It is the path. The tension between these forces is the fire in which integration is forged. When you deny one polarity, it grows in the unconscious and distorts your relationships, your choices, at your authority, your very sense of reality. You will keep attracting people who mirror the part of yourself you are running from. You'll think they are the problem, when in fact they are the lesson. The process of integrating the anima or animus is not intellectual. It is lived. Your authority means allowing yourself to feel what you were taught to avoid. At your authority, it means noticing when your emotional reactions are rooted in projections, when you're not responding to the person in front of you, but to an inner figure that you haven't yet named. It means reclaiming your inner balance so that your relationships are no longer based on need, fear, or fantasy, on truth. You stop seeking completion through others and begin to experience a deep, stable wholeness within yourself. Union of these archetypes is often symbolized in myths and dreams as sacred marriage, the alchemical merging of opposites. When the inner feminine and masculine come into balance, the psyche becomes unified. You are no longer ruled by one side of yourself. You can be strong and gentle, assertive and receptive, rational and intuitive. You begin to experience the full range of your humanity without shame. This is not just psychological development, it is spiritual awakening. Because when the inner opposites are reconciled, the ego no longer feels threatened by difference. You become less reactive, more accepting, more at peace with complexity in yourself and in others. And this inner harmony becomes a foundation for every outer relationship, every decision, every movement forward. The shadow is the forgotten sibling of the soul, the part of you buried beneath layers of denial, fear, and social conditioning. It is made of everything you rejected in order to survive, anger you weren't allowed to feel, desires you were told were shameful, talents you hid because they intimidated others. The shadow does not disappear simply because you ignore it. It waits, grows, and gains strength in the darkness, often influencing your life more powerfully than the parts of yourself you proudly display. What you repress, you become enslaved to, and what you refuse to acknowledge, you project onto others. The shadow is not evil, it is unlived life. And until you confront it, it will haunt your relationships, your choices, and your understanding of who you are. When people speak of self-improvement, they often talk about adding more discipline, more confidence, more positivity. But the truth is authority. The most profound transformation happens not by addition, but by integration. It is not becoming something else, but reclaiming what you've hidden. This reclamation starts with recognizing your capacity for darkness. Not in a theatrical or villainous way, but in the subtle ways you manipulate, deceive, dominate, or surrender your power. These moments may seem insignificant, an outburst, a judgment, a passive-aggressive comment. But they are messages from the shadow, revealing what you have yet to own. The more you suppress the shadow, the more it distorts your perception of others. You start to see in them what you refuse to admit in yourself. You call them selfish, weak, arrogant, needy, never realizing you're describing the disowned parts of your own psyche. This is projection, and it creates conflict not because others are wrong, authority, but because they reflect back to you what you cannot face. You'll find yourself attracted to people who awaken the shadow in you, authority, and then blame them when the relationship collapses. You'll avoid situations that challenge your self-image, even if they offer growth. You'll sabotage your own success because it threatens the fragile persona you've constructed. In every one of these cases, the shadow is pulling the strings. But confronting the shadow does not mean indulging it. It means acknowledging it with honesty and maturity. It means understanding where it came from and how it developed, not to justify harmful behavior, but to take responsibility for it. The shadow is born out of pain, often during childhood, when certain emotions or traits were punished or ignored. You learn to survive by abandoning parts of yourself. But now, as an adult, survival is no longer enough. You must evolve. You must revisit those disowned parts not as threats, but as allies. Because within the shadow lies your buried power, your creativity, assertiveness, sensuality, and intuition. Facing the shadow is uncomfortable. It requires a level of self-awareness that can shake your identity. It means admitting that you are not always the victim, Not always the hero, not always as innocent as you wish to be. But this humility is the gateway to holiness. When you can see your flaws without self-hatred and your gifts without arrogance, you begin to operate from a place of inner balance. You no longer need to pretend or hide. You become someone who can hold contradiction, who can be fierce and compassionate, disciplined and forgiving, grounded and visionary. The work with the shadow is never finished. It is cyclical. Every new stage of life reveals another layer of darkness to be integrated. But with each layer, you become more authentic. You stop performing and start living. You stop seeking approval and start seeking truth. The shadow teaches you that light without darkness is an illusion, and that true strength comes not from purity, but from integration. It is only when you have faced the parts of yourself you once feared that you can walk into the world with real confidence. Because you are no longer divided within, you have become whole, and in that wholeness, you become free to live without self-deception, to speak without shame, act with clarity and depth. The self is not the ego. It is not the role you play, the mask you wear, or the identity you defend. The self is the totality of who you are. Conscious and unconscious, light and dark, masculine and feminine, strength and vulnerability. It is the silent center of your being, the observer behind all thoughts, the one who witnesses your triumphs and failures without judgment. While the ego clings to control, the self embodies wholeness. It cannot be reduced to a name, a belief, a past, or a future. It is timeless. It is the soul's deep memory of what you truly are, and yet it often remains hidden beneath layers of persona, fear, and social expectation. The journey to the self is the journey of individuation, the process of becoming the whole and undivided person you were meant to be. But this journey is not comfortable. It is not about becoming better in the eyes of others or achieving worldly success. It is about stripping away everything that is false, everything that is borrowed, everything that is unexamined. It is about facing the wounds you've tried to forget, the impulses you've repressed, and the truths you've avoided. The self demands total honesty, not perfection. It does not want you to become something else. It wants you to remember what you already are beneath the noise. One of the greatest illusions that separates you from the self is the belief that you are only your thoughts, your emotions, or your image. But the self is not bound to the mind. It watches the thoughts come and go, like clouds passing in the sky. It witnesses your moods rise and fall, but it is not changed by them. It sees you grasp for validation, run from pain, chase after fleeting pleasures, and yet it remains still. The self is not concerned with winning or losing. It is concerned with integration, with truth, your becoming. To live from the self is to act from your deepest values, not your shallowest impulses. It is to stop living on the surface of your life and begin to descend into the depths. But the self is not discovered through thinking. It is revealed through confrontation. The confrontation with the shadow, with your projections, with your contradictions, with your unlived potential. Each time you integrate a lost part of yourself, the self becomes more visible. It does not shout. It whispers. It waits until you're ready to drop the need to impress, to prove, to escape. It waits until you are ready to stop asking, "What should I do?" and begin asking, "Who am I beneath everything I've been told?" The self has no fixed form. It expresses itself uniquely through every individual. This is why conformity is so dangerous to the soul. It drowns the self in collective noise. You were not born to mimic others. You were born to reveal something only you can reveal. The self carries a pattern, an inner blueprint, and your task is to align your outer life with that inner truth. This may mean leaving behind familiar identities, roles, or environments. It may mean walking away from comfort into solitude, from distraction into silence. Because the self does not compete for your attention like the ego does. It simply waits for you to return. When you begin to live from the self, your decisions change. You stop choosing based on fear or approval. You begin to ask different questions. Not, will this make me successful? Will this make me whole? Not, what do others expect of me? But what does my soul demand of me now? Your relationships shift as well. You stop seeking people who complete your mask and begin connecting with those who speak to your essence. You become less reactive, less fragile, more grounded in your being. You understand that you cannot be everything for everyone, and that you were never meant to be. You were meant to be fully, radically, fearlessly yourself. The paradox of the self is that it is both deeply personal and profoundly universal. When you connect with it, you feel more like yourself than ever before, and yet more connected to all of existence. You no longer live as an isolated fragment, but as a thread woven into a greater tapestry. Your suffering no longer feels meaningless. It becomes part of your transformation. Your past no longer defines you. It becomes your teacher. The self turns wounds into wisdom, silence into guidance, and solitude into revelation. It leads not with noise, but with presence. And through that presence, it becomes possible to live a life not of constant striving, but of deep, resonant truth. The path understanding the 7 archetypes of the soul is not a straight road. It is a spiral descent into the inner world, a sacred confrontation with all that lies hidden beneath the surface. These archetypes are not concepts to be studied and mastered. They are living forces that shape every decision, every relationship, every silent doubt, and every bold desire. To walk this path is to awaken to your inner architecture and to recognize that the conflicts in the world are reflections of the divisions within yourself. Each archetype, whether the innocent, the orphan, the warrior, the caregiver, the seeker, the destroyer, or the self, is not an isolated identity but a mirror of your soul in motion, evolving, breaking, healing, and returning to its center. The work of knowing yourself requires brutal honesty and radical compassion. It demands that you stop living from borrowed beliefs and start trusting the wisdom that speaks in whispers beneath the noise. When you embrace all 7 archetypes and allow them to dance together without shame or fear, you stop being a fragmented image of who you're expected to be and become whole. This is not the power that conquers others, but the kind that makes you unconquerable from within. And it is only from that place of wholeness that you can truly live with depth, love with truth, and move through life with the quiet force of someone who finally knows who they are.